all of us. And one thing we were talking about earlier, in this day and age, especially with social media, there's so much fighting. And all of us, whenever we write something that someone disagrees with, sometimes, well, too often, it gets personal instead of just talking about the data and the information. Yeah, Frank, you're really bad at that. Settle down, man.
He's written so much.
I didn't mean you.
Oh, yeah, you did.
But Stanton, when you disagreed with Stanton, he would get excited about it. He would want to publicly debate you about it, which was always fun to do. And he had the best time. He was always happy, never held it against anybody. We posted this debate with Jeremy Corbell about Robert Lazar, which we'll get into a little bit. You guys don't know this, but someone asked a question regarding that, so we'll pose that question in just a minute. But a lot of people were like, Jeremy was so mean, that young guy was so mean to Stanton, but Stanton had the best time. He loved it, and he didn't hold anything that was said in that debate against Jeremy or anyone. So he was a good model for us.
Did Stanton bet him $1,000?
As he did Phil Class.
Yeah, maybe expand on that.
Well, there was a matter of a document that was written with a certain pica type, and it was supposed to be from 1947. I think it had been in the National Archives, and Phil Class said nonsense. It was planted there. Said they didn't have those kind of typewriters in those days in government. He said, find me a legitimate, another document from that era with that kind of type on it. And he said, I'll bet you $1,000 you won't find it. I don't know why Phil Class was so confident, but when Stanton Friedman found him not one document, but I think he dropped a whole box of them on him, he did pay off $1,000. That's the only time I can think of when you can definitely say Phil Class was an honest man.
He was a trickster.
But it wasn't his $1,000.
Was the check backed on any bank?
So I have a couple questions left over from part one that I'll get into. However, if you have any questions, please do come up. Fill them out. We've got these sticky forms here, so put your question on there and we'll get to those. 2 hours may seem like a lot, but if you remember yesterday, time flies because none of these people can answer a question shortly. But even though
this man doesn't have a speaker badge on.
Oh, who's that guy?
I don't care because I don't either. So.
Oh, neither does he.
This is Kevin. But even though their answers are long, they're very interesting. So they're great. So the first question, I told you I was going to ask you about Robert Lazar. Robert Lazar is a guy who said he worked at Area 51 back engineering alien technology. And one of the questions was, did the Robert Lazar story have any influence over your approach or investigation? Maybe also share, if you would like, any of your thoughts on the Robert Lazar case.
Well, being I was last, you showed up late, I will just say no. He had absolutely no influence.
And I would agree, exactly. Zero. No influence whatsoever.
Frank, you've met him. What do you think?
Seems like figured out how to turn this on. There we go. Is it on? There we go.
Yeah.
Okay, no, it's not. just make it, just having fun.
He's a scientist. He's got trouble with a microphone.
That's right. No, you know what? The fact that I met Bob Lazar, and I never talked to him in reference to UFOs or anything. We actually went out rock collecting together at a uranium mine because he owns United Nuclear. And I never once spoke to him about UFOs because I figured everybody in the world was going to bug him to death about it. But I do know this. I've read the stories about him, and I would have to say that the fact that, back engineering, UFO stuff, handling UFO materials, all of this, I think was maybe a little bit of a drive for me, going, well, maybe I can find some of this stuff out there and prove it up, even though, and that's really the only, it was something that, it was a fascination for me, and I'm curious, so it's that curiosity, that drive that kind of keeps me going in the scientific world, so that's the only thing about it.
To answer the question, Alejandro, the answer is no, of course. He had no influence. but something about him, he was very glib, and he projected like, oh, this guy knows what he's talking about. Very glib, short, clipped sentences. And I was straddling the fence on him because just off the top, I didn't believe him, but he came across so well as in an interview. I thought, well, maybe I could be persuaded either way. Well, we, Don and Kevin, we have a friend in Sarasota, Florida named Anthony Bergalia who talked to Bob Lazar. He interviewed him, and Tony was from Massachusetts. And one of the degrees that Bob Lazar claimed to have had was from MIT, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, which I thought he looked kind of young to have a degree from there as well as from Caltech. But Tony said that he interviewed Lazar, and he said every student who went to MIT, they knew of a certain landmark which was close by the university. And so he asked, and I don't know what that landmark was. I don't know, Kelly Square Station or something, something like that. But Lazar did not know the answer. And for Tony, that was enough. This guy didn't go there because he would have obviously known the answer. He didn't know it.
The aliens erased it.
I first was exposed to Bob Lazar back when he was first interviewed by George Knapp, and he appeared in silhouette and was using a pseudonym Dennis. And he explained about his work at the secret base and that he was exposed to alien flying saucers. And, well, it wasn't too long after that. On Channel 13, we used to have a reporter they called Earthman David Garcia. Does anybody remember?
Yes.
Remember David Garcia? So Bob Lazar said, "I'll prove it to you." And Earthman David, with his Channel 13 crew, went out to a place where it was close enough to Area 51 that you could see the mountain range. And Bob is there, and Bob says, at 10:13, you're going to see one of these saucers come up over the ridge of the mountain in the background. It's going to appear kind of green, may appear to jump around a little bit, has to do with the propulsion system. Channel 13 broadcast that. The green, you couldn't actually tell saucer shape, but whether it was orb shaped or this green glow comes up over the mountain right when Bob Lazar said it was going to. And it did make these jumps where, it disappeared for a second, then it's over here, then it's over here. And it was broadcast on Channel 13, which is a local Los Angeles channel. So for all the debunkers of Bob Lazar, you have to explain that. He knew there was going to be a craft, what time it was going to be tested, and it was going to make some unusual maneuvers, and he predicted that. This was repeated on another night. John Lear was there with Bob Lazar. It's true that Bob Lazar made claims about his education that can't be backed up. It's also true that he knows a lot about a lot of stuff. He's very smart. He built these jet cars. He was pulled in to a project at Los Alamos by Edward Teller. For those that didn't believe he was connected there at all, his name was found in the phone book. And the reason Edward Teller called him in, apparently, was there had been a front page article about this interesting guy with a science background in Los Alamos, very young, who built these jet cars. And Teller was interested, so Teller's contact Bob Lazar said, led to him being brought in over at Area 51 and put to work on this secret assignment involving saucers that weren't made on Earth. So, I don't know. He said that he was shown this book that was the history of alien interaction with humans on Earth, and that aliens had modified our DNA multiple times over a period of thousands of years. There were a lot of other really strange things that he relayed, that he read in that book. And then he also tried to explain the propulsion system, and it was kind of a tantalizing idea about gravity amplifiers, that saucers had these gravity amplifiers that they could aim it at something and then be pulled toward it. So if the gravity amplifiers are aimed toward our moon, and they amplify the gravity pulling them toward the moon, then they can hover above the Earth. It's his explanation. The other big problem besides his education was that he attributed this gravity property to something called element 115. At the time he first made this claim, I don't think anybody had ever, would you say synthesized? Or, well, no, it's an element. Had ever created element 115. But later someone did, and they found that it had a half-life of like a millionth of a second or something like that before it degrades into something else. So element 115 had no staying power. It couldn't have been element 115 unless it was some strange off-world isotope, or he got the wrong number on the periodic chart. I don't know. But it's kind of strange. The guy comes out like that and comes out with some things in his story that should be the easiest to prove. His education, where he took courses, and it completely falls apart. So I'm going to give you my theory. It's inconsistent, but I think that he was like a patsy. I think Edward Teller thought, now here's a guy who, when we show him some exotic stuff, he's not going to keep his mouth shut. I think they were looking for somebody who would talk. Otherwise, why wasn't he arrested as soon as he was first appearing in silhouette? I think he may have been a mark, as we say, a sort of a chosen subject to be the one where people working a plant, well, no, a plant, he would have been knowingly. I don't think he knew that he was a mark. I think, this is just a theory, that they were looking at Area 51 to get this story out in the public, to test the public reaction to it. That we got saucers at Area 51. And they chose the perfect guy who they were sure would not keep his mouth shut. And they fed him all this stuff. I don't know, the falsification of the education, it could have been part of the plan to put something out there so that it could be discredited. In other words, he's telling a lot of things that might be true. It was true that the green fireball came up over the mountain when he said it would. He worked there, he knew something. He had a small W-2 from that operation. But yes, it's fishy, it's really fishy, but there was something real behind the deception. That's it.
All right. Anyone else? Kevin, you look eager.
No, actually, as Paul's theory goes, we've discussed this, and I pretty much agree with you, that unlike an Edward Snowden, that thought that as a whistleblower, and whether one think he traitor or hero, who would have ever predicted 25 years ago that you'd have to flee to Russia for asylum in this country? But I don't know how many are aware of Joe Rogan and his blog, the highest rated as far as blog show in the world. And I know that Lazar was on with him some weeks ago. And Rogan, who takes no hostages, I mean, he really hits you for hours as far as between the eyes, and he could not crack as far as Lazar. I watched it a couple of times, and I was impressed that Rogan was impressed with him.
And his story has remained consistent, hasn't it? He hasn't embellished it through the years. It stays the same story.
So, again, it's the original question, not that he has influenced us or affected us in any way, but I guess it comes back to maybe we need to step back and take another look. That there may be
there's something there.
There may be some fire to the smoke.
But I have to make one correction, Don. I think my radio show is the highest rated.
Oh, that I'm sorry. Yes.
All I would say is, so far as I'm consciously aware, the Lazar story has not really influenced, any of my own work. I've pretty much always just suspended judgment about Lazar, and by all accounts here, I would probably be wise to continue doing that because there are a lot of different ways of thinking about him.
Right. All right, thank you. So the next question, this was one, our last leftover from yesterday, but I think this is a real interesting one. And I think hearing from all of you on this would be good. Do you think the Roswell crash was intentional by aliens, an accident, or a ship shot down by the United States?
I'll jump in here because my favorite theory that I invented was that they'd done it on purpose to reveal themselves to the United States or to the world in the most non-threatening way possible. A crash ship and dead creatures isn't really very threatening. But I don't believe that for a minute. I just think it's a fun theory.
So what's your real theory?
It would have been an accident.
Yeah, I'd have to go along, pretty much the same way. I would say it just about had to be an accident. There have been stories to the effect that it might have had something to do with tracking systems, radar tracking systems interfering with the propulsion devices or something. And I don't know if that's feasible or not, but in any case, I really don't think they meant to do that.
At least I can remember how to turn it back on. Same. I could almost say ditto on this. I've read the stories. I've heard about the.
Does anyone have any Viagra? Where's the Viagra?
Highest rated show.
So, you know what? I'm also inclined to believe that it was an accident. I've heard the things about the radar interfering with their navigation. There was an interesting story that came out that was in reference to a gentleman that worked for the government that basically said that a jet flew out of like Clovis and had on board some electromagnetic pulse stuff that was kind of like microwave in nature, and they knew this stuff was flying around. They wanted to test this thing out, and they shot it down with this thing they supposedly got from the German. I read all the stories. There's no proof in reference to that, at least that I know of, and so I think the idea of an accident. Stuff happens. It really does. We have them, but when they're coming, if it's extraterrestrial, which I'm sure it is, if something travels that far, you would kind of hope that maybe they had enough technology so that they don't have mechanical failure, because it's long distances. But just like we think that we're infallible too with our aircraft, we have lots of accidents. So I'm sure it was probably an accident.
Well, somebody pushed the wrong button.
That's right. Or too much, like, brew or something. I don't know.
Yes, I also think it was an accident, whether it was an internal malfunction of some sort that we don't know. But several witnesses have described a severe thunder and lightning storm taking place that night. So the alternative theory, I think that many of us subscribe to, is that it was a lightning strike. If it was an internal explosion or malfunction. You would think that if it was something like radar, or we brought it down some way, that more than one would have been brought down, not just the one. And that idea of this is the way we're going to present ourselves, I don't think it deserves any consideration at all.
I guess I was always fascinated by the theory that a genuine UFO collided with a mobile balloon, wasn't it?
carrying Japanese prisoners.
That's
Yeah,
true.
yeah.
So, the Japanese prisoners.
And the mobile balloon was still flying.
That was still flying. I posed a question a few weeks ago to a skeptic that in our human arrogance, that if we can honestly say we still don't know what makes them fly, then I guess we shouldn't be predisposed in assuming why they would crash. In other words, why those same systems would fail. So yes, certainly that it was an accident by all accounts, and anyone suggesting any particular theory as to what brought it down is just that, a theory that remains far from proven. So.
I have two comments to make. Somebody used the word interstellar craft. I don't know that there's any reason to assume that it was an extraterrestrial interstellar craft, meaning that that's the craft that came the long, long distances. Of all the cases in ufology, I've always been really impressed by a 1986 November case of Japan Airlines and a sighting. Captain Terauchi, the pilot, reported, used the term mothership. He described it as like a gigantic cube, twice the size of an aircraft carrier. And he said that there were all these saucers coming and going from the cube. Well, if you take his report, I could imagine, well, maybe that cube was the interstellar craft, and that's what came from the great distances. And then they've got all these saucers that are doing reconnaissance, and they don't have to go so far. But they've got the technology to hover over the Earth and fly really fast. And so that's one thought. Another thing is, I think, Don, you were here with me at Roswell one 4th of July. I think we were having dinner in Hangar 84. There was some event, and it was the most massive lightning thunderstorm I'd ever heard in my life. I mean, that crashing of the thunder was, it was like a bomb. Something about this place and this time of year does get these absolutely massive storms. So the idea that lightning hit this thing, I think, is, very believable. Now, I don't understand, since a lot of the theory involves an escape craft or a pod that took the bodies out of a failing ship, how there would be time for a pod to escape from
There again, we're postulating as far as on human terms,
Right.
So we have to always be careful about that.
Right. And they could have been piloted inside the pod, inside the ship, so that they're ready to leave at any time. We don't know.
Yep, we don't know. But big storms, last night was a big storm. I was afraid that, I was certain that we would not survive the parade last night, but I'm happy
We survived the parade. We dried off on the drive back.
we did. Right.
That was on the metallized float that was wet. Perfect.
Don sat right
Pulling
down.
rods up in the air.
Don tells me he sat right down onto a puddle.
Oh, where we sat was wet, yeah.
That's what he said.
That's
Do you have that, Mark?
How many
That I
witnesses?
sat on a puddle.
2 pairs of pants help, so.
So this question is for Tom Carey. Someone would like to know about the Corona Town Hall meeting.
4 minutes. I don't know who that is, but that was a very interesting event. It's called the Roswell incident, but a lot of people in Corona, because the debris field site and where the explosion took place is closer to Corona, the town of Corona, up north. So we got the idea, let's have a presentation to take place in Corona. And we heavily advertised it in the Corona newspapers and every other means possible. And
You were to be
and I was the speaker. Yes. So we had been out in the desert all day long and looking for Richard's Cave, and we found it. So we after the late afternoon, we went to Corona. Well, let's get a little something to eat. The presentations, I think, at 8 o'clock or 7 o'clock, and So we arrived at Corona, and it was at the Corona, if I recall, the Corona High School gymnasium. I could see at least 150 seats set up there, just the whole auditorium. I said, oh my goodness. And I'm all dusty and grimy, and I don't feel like changing into a suit, you know. So I said, let's wait to see how many show up here. Well, nobody showed up. And cars kept driving around in a circle, laughing.
Same car.
And actually, the other thing was, back then we didn't have PowerPoint. We had the circular Kodak carousels.
It was a self.
Yeah, and what they had for me must have been the first carousel. Generally, what is this? So I said, well, maybe they got the time wrong.
Yeah, or the day.
Or the day. So we're sitting out there, and they kept driving around in a circle, laughing, hi, fellas. And I actually was never so happy that nobody showed up. I was spent, having spent the day out in the desert all sweaty, and so...
that went right to your resume, didn't
That
it?
went right to my resume. Speaker in Corona.
Actually, you did say to me a little earlier that you were tired today and you hoped that nobody would show up.
What year was that? Do you remember what year?
1803.
That was around 2005, wasn't it?
No,
Earlier. 2000, 2001.
Okay.
And we were looking for Richard's Cave. Excuse me. It took all afternoon.
Chokes you up.
I think Dennis was with us.
I have a little, just if you can hold that for just a sec. Because I think that would be good to share. What is Richard's Cave? What was that you found?
Oh, we were looking for Richard's Cave, who was a teenager at the time that had gotten a hold of some pieces of the wreckage, and he had this secret cave that he would hide everything that he didn't want other people to know about. And we got the story from the family, and that whole family is another story. And oh no, that'll take too long. That'll take too long.
You could be giving a shot.
No, so we got out there, and we found the cave. It was fenced off because it had collapsed. It was a huge cave.
The roof collapsed.
Huge cave they called the stadium. It was so big, and
Torback Cave. Yeah.
and I tried to coax Don to go into it. I said, go in.
60-foot drop.
And,
About 10 feet was solid rattlesnake nest.
Yeah.
Wow.
So we decided not to give it a try because you never know. But Bill Brazel also told us about the cave.
And the spike at the top that they used to tie a rope to and drop
Yes.
60 feet
Yes.
down.
But that was quite a day. And for me, it had a happy ending because I didn't have
Showed up.
So Paul, yes, you wanted to share.
So the question had to do with Corona, an event in Corona, because the crash happened close to Corona, not Roswell. Roswell just sort of took it over for publicity's sake once the base got involved. But 1953 was the George Powell film War of the Worlds. How many of you saw the original War of the Worlds movie? Just about everyone. So if you get a chance to see it again, take a look at the scene where Gene Barry and Ann Robinson are flying in a plane to get away from the Martians, and their plane crashes into a sort of a ranch house in a desolate area. And later, when Gene Barry is rescued from there, the military is asking him, well, where was this? And he says, well, it was in Corona. Oh, gosh.
Yes.
Now, it meant Corona, California, because that part of the story took place in California. But why did they choose the name of all the towns and all the places? And they got a little farmhouse that could have been Bill Brazel's place to stage that scene. And, I knew George Powell, but back then it was before I knew about Roswell, I wasn't in any position to ask him about that. I didn't know. I spotted this corona thing, you know, much later. But is it possible that George Powell, who was close with Willy Ley, you know, the great German, one of the founders of the rocket program, right? Is it possible that he heard something on the inside and inserted that into the script? I think it's possible. When you think how motivated Powell was, he was the first producer to really focus on space for space movies. Destination Moon, an accurate portrayal in 1949 of how we would get to the moon. War of the Worlds, When Worlds Collide, and The Conquest of Space, which was a story about having a space station around the Earth, another revolutionary idea that would come to pass for a long time. So I'm prepared to think that Corona was in that movie intentionally.
Well, if you want to go in that direction, how many saw Alien? They're trying to find they don't know what system they're at. They're flying around. They're trying to contact Earth in their spaceship, and the system they find the alien is Zeta Reticuli.
Really?
Yeah.
Yes.
And Kevin will also recall when we were first discussing the title of the first book, and for the very same reason, it being closer to Corona, we considered Crash at Corona. But then we decided no one would know where Corona was.
And still does.
And still does. And then who shortly thereafter names his book Crash at Corona. Let's stand free.
Well, because we already stole the Roswell.
That's right.
Speaking
But
of
we were right. We were right. Ours sold much more than the Crash at Corona. So.
Speaking of aliens and crashing, on Aliens Resurrected, they were going to crash into Earth, and one of the actors says, "Earth, man, what a crap hole."
I got the topper for reminiscences on this one. How many remember the singer Frankie Lane? Remember Frankie Lane? Well, one of his big hits was a song called Mule Train, about 1949, somewhere in there. And one of the lines is, "Got a pocket chaw tobacco for a rancher in Corona." That was Mac Brazel.
And do you think the Mexicans named their beer Corona for that very reason?
And the satellite program called Project Corona.
Well, I will posit, because of something that happened earlier, that War of the Worlds had Corona in it, possibly because the people who put that in there were psychic, as is Mr. Paul Davids. We saw him doing some tricks here, where he guessed what was going on in some of your minds.
Mini miracles.
Many miracles. But he also did another mini miracle by bringing up War of the Worlds, because somebody asked a question directed at you about War of the Worlds. Very interesting. They were asking, in the remake, why did they not land in Grover's Mill?
Because the people who made the film have no sense of history.
Yeah, well, it was a Steven Spielberg remake, and I watched it once, you know, my hands sort of over my eyes like this, not because I was frightened by what I was seeing on the screen, more embarrassed. I don't know. I'll forgive Steven Spielberg that one. He's done so many great ones.
Yeah. Spielberg's great, but that was not one of the best
Definitely
movies.
missed the market now, grand
Yeah.
opportunity.
Yeah. he
I think it
really
started with
screwed
the
up.
script writing.
Yeah.
Bad movie.
But then there was the follow-up movie to Roswell movie called Roswell Attacks, or
The Aliens Attack.
Aliens Attack, and they used some of our props too, didn't they?
I don't know. I just remember we were really upset
We were really
at the time.
because they totally fictionalized the
They
entire
tried to make it look like it was a sequel to our movie.
but yet that it was an invasion.
Yeah, it had nothing to do with.
Those Hollywood, man. What a crap hole. All right, so this is a great one. I want to remind people, some new people came in. If you have any questions, come up and you can put them on these stickies that we have right here, and we'll ask those questions. So come on up with your questions. This is another good one where we can go down the line here. And we'll start with Kevin. This person would like you all to share any personal UFO experiences you may have had.
I normally say I haven't had one. But back when I was growing up and living in Denver, there was something called the Denver UFO Society. I believe they still exist. We're having a big meeting in Castle Rock. And if you're Stephen King fan, you'll realize the importance of Castle Rock. But this was in Colorado. We were sitting around the bonfire or whatever, and we saw something go overhead, just a light go overhead from north to south. Flashed once when it got above us, and somebody said, "Oh, look, they're signaling us." And I'm thinking, yeah, sure they are. But that was it. At the time, there were no satellites in polar orbit, so I don't know what it was, but it's certainly nothing spectacular.
Well, I mentioned on the first panel, I had a UFO, the only UFO sighting I've ever had, I had when I was 5 years old, and it was the same weekend as the Roswell incident. But it was 300 miles east of here in Breckenridge, Texas, where I was born. And I was lying on a cot on my grandmother's porch. We had come down from Wichita Falls, where we lived, to see my dad's folks, my grandparents. And I saw this kind of boot heel shaped thing come across the sky, nice and smooth and quiet, and I had it in view for maybe 2 seconds. And that was the same, as I said, the same weekend, July 4th weekend, 1947. And years later, I got to thinking, well, I could have just been this mixed up little kid, I could have. They used to have these searchlights that would play on the bottoms of clouds, to advertise a used car lot or something. I thought maybe I could have seen something like that. It might not have been anything really anomalous. And so my wife Molly and I went back to Breckenridge and searched the old newspaper files. We had to use they had them on an old microfiche machine that I think dated to about the Battle of Hastings, maybe. And anyway, we managed. You couldn't even take a picture if you found a page you wanted. You had to copy it out into a notebook, one of those things. And sure enough, a whole group of people at a party down the road had seen the object, and unlike me, the 5-year-old kid, unlike me, they had reported it. And they were all they were at a party at the former newspaper editor's house, and so actually that was kind of nice corroboration, because it kind of told me I wasn't just a mixed up little kid. I really saw something,
Great, thanks.
I was fresh out of college and took a road trip with a friend of mine. I borrowed my dad's van and we took off cross country for a month-long or longer trip, just traveling cross country, just doing what basically kids do when they're fresh out of college. Instead of looking for work, we were out having fun, or trying to have fun. So we were camped out here in New Mexico at Ute Lake State Park. It's up by Tucumcari, and it was basically pretty late at night. It was about 10 o'clock, I guess. We were sitting there by a campfire, and the gentleman that I was with, I remember his name vividly. His name was Bob Visconti, and so we're sitting there by the campfire, and he says, "Frank, look, there's a UFO." And I looked up in the sky, and there is your typical little tiny star-looking thing traveling across. And I says, "Oh, it's a satellite. I've seen like hundreds of those things before." He says, "No, watch what it does." So I'm watching. I says, "No, it's a satellite." And then it did the following thing. It did this perfect zigzag shape, like back and forth, like this, really fast, and then zipped across the horizon. And I'm going, I guess that's a UFO. I was pretty much convinced after that. It's the only one I've ever seen that would actually say, yeah, that was definitely a UFO, because those right angle turns, that sharp, that fast, and then zipping over the horizon was pretty amazing to see that. And we hadn't had it was just, I don't know how to describe it. It was strange, it was weird, and I remember it vividly.
I've had 4 sightings. The first
this weekend, right?
After drinking Corona.
The first one in 1965 when I was in the Air Force, and the most recent 2 years ago going home from Roswell. I'll tell you about the first one and the last one. The first one, I'm in the Air Force Station McClellan Air Force Base in Sacramento, California, and I'm outside our barracks waiting for a ride. I don't know where I was going, but I'm standing outside waiting, and right up above, this is noontime, straight up, there's this disc, a white disc just sitting there over the base. And I'm thinking, okay, don't know what that is. It's not moving. I'm sure there's going to be an aircraft go up and inspect that to see what that, and nobody took off. So I'm watching this, and someone said, Tom, you got a phone call inside. So I went inside, and I was on the phone for no more than 30 seconds, maybe 15 seconds. I came back out, it was gone. So I'm thinking, okay, if that was a balloon, I'd still see it, falling to Earth. And if it was a aircraft of some sort, I would still see it moving away. But there was none of that. It was there 1 second and gone 15 seconds later, totally. Still don't know what it was. The most recent one, I was going home to Philadelphia from Roswell, and I'm sitting in a window seat. So I'm sitting there, and we're above the clouds, and I'm thinking, boy, look at all this guy. I've been doing this trip for 20 years. How come I've never seen a UFO? Never. And honestly, God, just then, I saw they talk about this tic-tac shape now, shaped like a tic-tac. There's this, I'd say it's 1,000 feet off of our right wing of the plane, but it's going slower than the plane. So it had sort of drifted back into our field of view because it was not going as fast as our aircraft. So I'm looking at this, I said, I wonder what another airliner is doing this close to our plane. And I'm looking at it and I said, well, wait a second, I don't see any wings. There's no wings on this thing. And I'm thinking, oh boy, I'm sure they're going to, the wings are going to come out at some point, and they never did. There were no windows. It was colored somewhere between white silver, and no tail, just this is like an airliner fuselage without wings, without a tail, without windows. And it's just going slower than our aircraft until it disappeared. So we go into our descent path into the Philadelphia airport. And just as we're starting our descent, here comes this craft. It goes right across the front of our plane at a diagonal. And I'm thinking, I don't think that's such a good idea for another aircraft when you're in descent to do that. And it just took and went in back of us, and I lost it again. So after we all deboarded, I said, I'm going to wait out here and wait for the pilot. They asked him if he saw what I saw, but he never came out. And that was my most recent sighting.
What about the other two? You said you had 4.
Both of them went over my house. One was a triangular-shaped craft with no writing on it, no sound, no exhaust, just a triangular-shaped craft, I'd say about 5,000 feet up. Went silently over my house. This is about 6-7 years ago. And last year, I'm sorry, this one was earlier. This year was another tic-tac type craft, off in the distance, but I could still see enough. And it had an exhaust. It had twin exhausts. But when a fighter plane or one of those planes has an exhaust, it stays in the air for a long time after the plane is left, right? You see the exhaust? Well, the exhaust on this one stuck with the craft. It just traveled along and never left a trail. And again, no windows, no wings, no nothing, no sound. And it was close enough where I should have seen those things, and I didn't. So.
I'm a country boy. I've lived my entire life in rural America, and I can't think of a time that where the entire starlit sky wasn't visible. Camping out under the stars with the scouts, and thereafter, and playing many an evening ball game as far as under the stars, that type of thing. And then for as often that have actually been out to the Corona site after dark and just parking the car and the stars looking like you could just pluck them right from the evening sky. And I've never seen anything. So I think they're
Open your eyes.
I think they're afraid of me. So,
Stanton hadn't seen anything either, right? Stanton,
His whole
I think-
life.
Yeah, his whole life never saw anything.
But he said he never saw a proton or a neutron either. I think a lot of you were here to hear me before, and how many of you did hear me tell about the sighting from my house? Not everybody. I'll give you the abbreviated version with a few more details. So, it was February 25th, 1987, about 4:15 in the afternoon, and my daughter was on the second floor in her bedroom, and her desk is right up against a window, and she looked up and out. She doesn't know why she looked out the window, but at the time she said, "Dad, I heard a noise," and I said, "Was it like a car honking on the street because somebody else saw this thing too and they were alerted?" She said, "No, it was more like a sound in my ear." And that had me worried later on when I learned about Woodley Strieber inductions and things like that. I didn't know, but there was no reason she should have heard that in her ear. She screamed at me. I was on the ground floor, "Daddy, get upstairs right now. I see a flying saucer." And I hesitated. I didn't believe I was going to see a flying saucer. I asked her to look again. Wasn't it a Goodyear blimp? No, Daddy, get up here right now. She screamed. It was like urgent for her. So I ran upstairs. She was 9. I almost collided with my 6-year-old son going into her room. She pointed out the window, and that was the moment of truth for me because it was broad daylight, and I saw a classic dome disc descending from a cloud high above. And we opened the window and we went out on our roof, and we stood there holding hands watching it, and it kept descending, it approaching, and I think it was about the size of a small car. Classic dome, pewter silver. It was an upside down soup bowl on top of an upside down plate, and then a regular plate shape meeting it, and then a shallower bowl and a little smaller bowl on the very bottom. And it didn't make a sound. There was no exhaust. There were no portholes or windows. And I think it got to the point where it was hovering over the road in front of our house or over the neighbor's roof across the street. It was really close. And we watched it spellbound. Of course, I would have loved to have taken a picture. There were multiple problems. One, that morning there had been snow up on the mountains of Mount Wilson, which you can see from our house. And I had shot up every picture on the roll of film that was in my camera. It was in my office downstairs. So I would have had to go to the refrigerator, get a fresh roll, load it, get back upstairs. I knew it would be gone, number one. Number two, I wasn't going to leave my children up there on the roof. So I just resolved to myself to be the best witness I could, burn this in my memory, make every observation I could. So a couple of precursors to this sighting that could be important. This happened February 25th, 87. In November of 86, that was the Japan Airlines Captain Terauchi sighting that I told you about before, with the Cube mothership 2 times the size of an aircraft carrier, with saucers coming and going, and that was off the Alaska coast. That was about 10 weeks before my sighting. And I had been aware of that. I read about it in Time magazine, and I even sent away for all the materials about it, because they sent you conversations from the pilot and questions and answers and interview. So it was in my mind, and I looked, I said, I'm seeing one of these saucers that Captain Terauchi saw off the coast of Alaska, and here it is at my house. There was another thing, and that was, I was a skeptic about UFOs, but particularly the Billy Meyer case at that time. I had a friend who was a devout believer that the Billy Meyer, does everybody know Billy Meyer, the Swiss farmer who took lots of pictures of craft that he said came from the Pleiades?
A lot of fake pictures.
That's what I would have said then, definitely, because I had a friend who said, we've been making a documentary about Billy Meyer, and it's not quite going together, and you're a writer, and would you write a narration for it that maybe will tie this whole thing together? And I said to him, Philip, I'm not going to do it unless I'm convinced that these pictures could be real. I want to show them to the special effects expert that I'm working with now. And he looked at them, he had criticisms of some of the pictures, and one of the biggest criticisms was that one of the Meyer craft was over a snowy region of a mountain. And the snow was very, very bright, but the underside of the craft was absolutely dead black. And my friend said, look, a good special effects man would have had another light source, thrown some ambient light up onto the bottom of his model to make it look like it's reflecting off the snow. They didn't do that. All right? I turned down that job. It would have been a few $1,000s of writing a narration. I didn't want egg on my face. I wasn't a believer. And yet, while we were watching this craft, first it hovered, and it was going a little bit like this. I'd say, like if you spin a quarter and imagine slow motion just before it hits the table, it's that kind of a wobble motion. Then it flew to the side without a wobble. I talked the other day about how then I could see it through sort of the window made by the limbs of a tree. It gleamed orange off the end of the craft. But then, just before it flew away, the underside of the craft turned absolutely dead black. And it was so pitch black. And this was broad daylight. You know, the special effects man didn't think to put some ambient light on his craft. And then it turned back normal silver on the bottom and flew away. I told you that, didn't I? You knew that. And this really shook me up because it was like, oh yeah? You think we Pleiadians have fake craft? Huh? You want to see? You didn't like the black? So I felt slapped on the wrist, but shaken up. And then I've already talked about how that sent me on a quest. And I did feel sort of tapped by the magic wand on the shoulder that, Paul, now it's your responsibility to tell the world. And 7 years later, I'm producing the Roswell movie for Showtime, which is seen by millions of people. I think the largest audience suddenly knows what Roswell is because of that movie. I just want to tell you one other thing. I did for many years go out on my roof at around 4:15 every year on February 21st. Yeah, it was like a pilgrimage to see, you know, they're not going to come back. But could they come back just as a sign? I'd just so love to see it again. So the first year anniversary, and I think you're going to remember this, I'm out on the roof looking for the craft. And Hollis, my wife, comes to the window with the phone in her hand and says, Paul, you got a phone call. And I said, you know, can I call them back? Is it important? She said, it's from New York. So I took the phone while I'm standing out on the roof. How many people know who Bud Hopkins is? Not everybody. Bud Hopkins, famous UFO researcher in New York who researched missing time in the case of abductions. And he was one of the first people, he wrote the book Intruders, one of the first people to really deal with the effects of abduction and using hypnosis to recover the memories. So I'm out on the roof. Hollis has handed me the phone, and it's a network in New York saying, you know, we got your name from Don Schmidt. We're filming a pilot about UFOs. Bud Hopkins is going to be in it. Can we fly you to New York to have you be in this pilot? It's the timing. Think of the timing. I was out there waiting for the aliens to return, and I get the call to be on a show to talk about them. That's what happened.
Serendipity.
Yeah.
All right, thank you. Kevin, did you have something to share down there? I heard you were sharing it already before the...
What, are we high school now? Did it bring gum for everybody?
I should be asking you that question.
Yes, you should.
Go ahead.
No, I have nothing more to share on the fact that Billy Meyer is full of crap, so there you go. But Don Burleson would like to say a word.
A word. I just a little comment to follow up on something Don was talking about being out in the country, you know, with the sky being so clear and so on.
one of the really ironic things about that, if you've ever been way out in the desert, away from any city lights, you know, and you've looked at the sky the way it is out there, the curious thing is, familiar constellations are harder to spot in that sky because of all the background stars that you can't see in the city. You know, when you're in the city, you say, oh, well, that's the constellation of Cygnus, the Swan. There's a star there, and a star there, and a star there. You know, and if there was something anomalous there, you say, wait a minute, that one doesn't belong there, you know, because I know what the constellation looks like. But on some nights, you're lucky if you can even find that constellation out there. So an angularly small object, stationary, could be harder to see, ironically enough, in the clear sky, you know, than in a sky that's somewhat, you know, clouded by city lights.
You're absolutely correct. In fact, on one occasion, Tom and I were coming back from Corona, well after dark, on 247, the Corona Road, back to 285, coming back into Roswell. And we're just driving along, and I just happened to ask Tom, did you ever wonder how dark it was out here? And he goes, well, no. I killed the lights on the car. And it was black. It was like we were instantaneous, we were in a closet just like that. And he hits me in the shoulder, and I hit the lights, and he goes, don't you ever do that again, you scared me to death. So.
He had the habit of not effecting the turns until the last second. He has trouble, I know he has trouble seeing out of one eye, so we're going, like that, and he doesn't see the curves until the last minute, and we're going, what, 90?
Wanted to get back to eat, so.
When this Billy Meyer,
Was it paved road? Or, yeah,
when this Billy Meyer, is he the fellow that he's, looks like a goblin, and he's got one arm?
Yes.
And he lives way out in the boondocks, but he's got all of this photographic equipment?
Yeah.
Switzerland. No, he doesn't have a lot of equipment. Yeah, he had an Olympus. Yeah, and the Japanese interviewed him and asked him, you know, how did you make all these photos very clear of these flying saucers?
And somehow he got these clear as a bell photos of many, many, many UFOs where most of us haven't seen any. So
Well, he said, in answer to the question, he said, well, he said, this is my camera, this is an Olympus pen, and he only had one arm. And he said, so you see, I advance the film like this, and I hold it with my hand with the shutter, and I put it up to my eye like this, and I snap.
but he had so many sightings.
Well,
This was before there was Photoshop.
and I was picking on Kevin, but to back up both of their point, a point of clarification is that Billy Meyer says his photos are fake. I mean, he had so many people that had criticized and pointed things out that you can ask any expert or even look this up. Billy Meyer said, oh, the aliens just told me recently, and this was, I think, in early 2000s, that they are fake, that the government stole my original photos.
The Men in Black got them.
Yeah, the Men in Black got
And
them
replaced it with these fake ones.
and substituted them, and the aliens knew that they did this, but they didn't even tell me till years later. So he's got a lot of credibility issues now.
I thought you were going to say it's a lot of credibility.
But listen, I don't want to be.
Nobody wanted to hear that anyway.
Kevin has people for his famous podcast that help him with the microphones and everything, so.
I don't want to be the
You don't know the half of what happened today, so.
I don't want to be the defender of Billy Meyer, but I will point out that I know his last name is Horn. What's his first name?
Michael Horn.
Michael Horn lives in the U.S. and he is a fanatic defender of Billy Meyer. I mean, he has. It's almost messianic. He's made videos to support my year, and he lives near Flagstaff, and I had a place in Sedona, and we met in
Do we
Sedona.
have his address? Because I think a flaming arrow would solve some of the problem.
So, Michael Horn, I challenged him on all this stuff, and he said, listen, here's what I want you to do. He said, Billy Meyer, in his published contact notes, and you can check the dates those books were printed, decades ago, And I happened to have the books. And he said, I will point you to chapter and verse in his contact notes where Billy Meyer said that his contact, Semyazi, gave him scientific information that later turned out to be true, proven, but decades later. And he said, I'm going to refer you to the articles of the scientist who suddenly discovered this area where there are these two craters right side by side in the under the ocean at a certain point. He said he gave the exact height of the highest mountain, which isn't Mount Everest. He had an explanation for the faces of Easter Island and where they came from and how they were moved and all of these things. So I read in the contact notes that, and I found about 10 examples he gave me that were published long ago where, yes, he said all these things.
That you can verify, because I've got to say, I've done this research. All of these books were allegedly written before the events, but
And they have multiple copyright dates in them.
exactly, but not shared publicly, allegedly, till after these
This is
discoveries
true for
were
some,
made.
and some of
It's
them are
true
only-
for
some of them are
all
only-
of them.
Some of them, I don't think all.
I
some were
agree with
published
Alejandro,
in-
because I've done the exact same thing, and the stuff that Billy Meyer has said has not been proven out. He said, for example, he gave the one of the moons of Jupiter, he talked about that, and it came out later that he was wrong on that. He said there'll be 2 planets found beyond Pluto, and that's not true.
Interview Horn on your.
Yes,
Yeah,
you-
so you battled him on that. I'm just saying that I had early publications of the contact notes, because I got them from Wendell Stevens.
a very credible source.
Yeah, well, but he published them long before, and I was able to find a number of these things.
Whoa.
And then I was given from my articles that gave the name of the scientist who made the discovery, what the discovery was. I'm not saying he batted 1,000. I'm saying that I found some and it just really surprised me. It doesn't make a believer out of me, but it raises questions.
Paul, he may have had notes. He may have had many contacts. And the only thing that I know is that the photos that I saw were fake.
I particularly like the dinosaur photos. Those were very nice.
Yeah, he has been caught in many hoaxes.
We had a problem with that.
Yes, where he took these alleged dinosaur pictures because the aliens took him back in time to look at the dinosaurs. Those were all discovered to be National Geographic pictures. There were aliens that he took pictures of, these beautiful blonde women
How about God's
who
eye?
turned out to be the dancers on
That Sullivan show?
Sullivan show, I think it was.
No, it was the Dean Martin show.
Dean Martin, you're right, Dean Martin. And I've debated Michael Horn too, and he admitted to me that, oh, well, we didn't publish any of this stuff till after it came out because we didn't want people, I don't know, he had some kind of goofball. But even with the point about the photos having been stolen, and Billy Meyer says, oh, now these are just fakes that the government, he admits to all of that. So Michael Horn will admit to the facts, especially when they're public, but otherwise he's very shady in the way that he defends.
Okay, I'm
But
done defending
we really
Bill
want to
Meyer.
discuss Bill Meyer.
But quickly, to me, it's this simple, and Nick Pope was an example of this prior to when his Wendelstein Forest book came out. And he was downplaying Roswell, that Roswell was passé, and that we should put it aside, that the true main UFO event of all time was Wendelstein Forest. And I recall we were talking, and I said, well, can't you see what he's doing? He needs to clear the field. He needs to push us out of the way so he can sell more of his own books. And the fact that Michael Horn says that all other UFO cases are illegitimate, didn't happen. But the only one legitimate is the Billy Meyer case. So again, it's a case of, I need you out of my way so I can sell my books.
And the point I want to make is that I don't believe Billy Meyer, but I do believe Paul Davis. I don't want that to take
Let's give Paul Davis a round of applause. Way to go, Paul.
I don't have any photos of
Well, because if you left the kids on the roof, you wouldn't have had them out.
That's his wife speaking. He would have gotten big trouble. And as anybody married or with a significant other, we fear no one more than our significant others.
And the next question is, what do you think of the Billy Meyer case?
Well, a similar question. Actually, this is a legitimate, what do you think of this case question, though? And whoever wants to jump in, I don't know who might be the top expert on this. I know who I think is the top expert on this one, but do any of you have any insights or opinions on the Battle of Los Angeles event that occurred in the 1940s during World War II?
Yeah, good question.
Why did you give me that?
Because you were in college back then.
He was in college.
For me, I find a very interesting case. And quite frankly, I don't know what to believe about it. The one photo, maybe somebody up here knows more than I do about it. The one photo shows a bunch of searchlights focusing on an object with all these little shell bursts around it. And it happened in, I believe,
February 25th,
1942.
the same date as my sighting all those years later.
Well, there might be a connection. But the story has really grown over the years. Of course, there was invasion fever back then. They were, the Pearl Harbor had just happened, and our fleet was sunk, and there was fear of Japanese invasion on the West Coast. So they were trigger happy to begin with, and I guess somebody reported something up in the sky, and all of a sudden everybody started firing the anti-aircraft weapons. And the one photo, maybe there's more, I don't know. I only know the one photo. You can see the beam focusing on some object which they were shooting at, but they never brought down, as far as I know. And I think our friend Ben Hansen did a show on this. And quite frankly, Alejandro, I don't know what to think about it. But,
I will say someone I think we all respect as a great researcher, the guy, I didn't know so much either. I knew essentially what Tom said. We all know that, that there's this amazing photo. It was an interesting event. But my eyes were really opened by a talk given by that I think everybody needs to see because it's one of the best I've seen, by David Marler. David Marler did some incredible work, and it was related to Ben Hansen's because the people who shot the Ben Hansen episode where he covered it went to David Marler's house the next day to film something completely different. And they're like, wait a second, you got a photo here. We just covered this Battle of LA case, and I've never seen this photo. And Marler said, exactly, no one's seen this photo because it's my work, and let me tell you about it. And so they eventually included some of that. But excellent case. What I didn't realize is that there's radar data in this case. There are government files, a ton of very interesting stuff. You got to see David Marler's presentation on this.
It was also the inspiration for a pretty terrible movie called Battle L.A.
Right.
Terrible.
Don, did you have something to add there? No? Okay. All right, the next question. This will be an Alejandro question, I guess. Here's my question for you all. So there's a lot of talk about disclosure. When are we going to get disclosure? How is disclosure going to happen? Yada, yada. However, there's a major third party involved here that can do whatever they want, whenever they want. If we're being visited by others, why aren't they disclosing? And what do you think their motivations are for visitation? Let's start at the end, Kevin.
Well, I think we should ask Billy Meyer. He has all the answers. I'm sorry, Paul, I couldn't resist.
You yourself said that there were two sides of the debate, the Roswell debate. You were originally going to take the con side.
No, I said there
wasn't enough people.
We were going to have a debate on UFOs.
Okay.
And
I switched sides.
I switched sides because in a debate you have to be able to.
So I raised a few points in defense of Billy Meyer. It doesn't mean that I'm ready to go to bat for him. Really. Okay.
So we're moving on from Billy Meyer. And we had another question in there somewhere. Oh, disclosure. In the military, as an intelligence officer, you may know things that other people don't know. What I'm saying is, I got a call from a newspaper when I was at Richards-Bauer Air Force Base, and the reporter was talking about an event that had taken some place in the world. And I was fully cognizant of it because I read the classified traffic on it. And he was asking me questions about it, and I denied everything. And he was yelling at me about being a stupid intelligence officer and all that. And I said, no, I'm not dumb enough to become a source for your story. But the military will hold a position as long as it is tenable, even though there's an ability of another entity, whether it's a terrestrial entity or extraterrestrial, to change the narrative. In other words, the military would say, or the government would say, there are no such things as UFOs, knowing full well that the aliens can change it anytime they want. They just haven't done it. And so you maintain a position, even if you know that there's the possibility of somebody else changing the narrative. And I think that's one of the problems we run into with the possibility of disclosure is they are going to maintain their position until they are forced to take a different tack.
So that's the answer for the humans. What about the non-humans? I mean, you believe Roswell was an extraterrestrial event, so why haven't they disclosed? And what do you think their motivations may be?
They were annoyed at us because they crashed this craft and had the dead bodies for us to get the benign explanation, and we just ignored it. No, it's
That was a joke.
apparently not a very good one.
That's why I had to let them know it was a joke.
No, I don't think the aliens don't care. You know, they're doing their thing, and I always thought of it as the prime directive from Star Trek: observe but don't interfere. Even though in Star Trek they violated it in every episode.
Yeah.
But it would be like Jane Goodall observing the chimpanzees. She didn't want to interact with the chimpanzees because that changes the dynamic, and even the observation can change the dynamic. But it was just observation of what they were doing, and I've always thought that the alien would be observing us and seeing how our civilization evolves and don't want to interfere with it. So I think they're just like Jane Goodall and the other anthropologists who are observing the society without interfering with it and changing it. So I think that's always been kind of my thought on it.
As far as the general question of, the prospects of disclosure go, I have to kind of say that I kind of think of myself as a disclosure agnostic. I'm hopeful. When we see the Navy, for example, say, if you're one of our pilots, you might be able to actually file a report. We might not put you, with a psychiatrist, and we may even release a couple of interesting photos. I'm not so sure, actually, that they could release all the information they have, even if they wanted to, because it must be so massive, it's almost unimaginable. So that, I'm hopeful that actually, I'll put it this way, I'll believe it when I see it, but as far as the alien player in the drama, I've always been a little nervous about trying to speculate about alien motives and alien psychology, because their minds may be as different from us as we are different from an earthworm. If I try to understand the motivations of an alien, I have to stop and think about the fact that I'm not really sure I understand the motives or the motivations of my cat. And that's a terrestrial, being. I think. Well, yeah. I think we may be on kind of shaky ground, but if I had to take a guess, I think I would agree with Kevin that they may just be watching us. Something in the same spirit as that in which you might stand and watch a roach before you decide whether you're going to step on it. They may just be watching to see if we're worth saving.
What if we're there? What if we are their tourist industry? They're coming down to check out the little ants running around the anthills. They really don't care that they're unusual because they're so far advanced. They're just going to come down and check us out. I don't know. Do you pay attention to an anthill in your backyard? You're there, you look, you see it. Oh, well, here's these little ants running around carrying their stuff, doing this, doing that. It's curiosity. Maybe they're just curious. Tourist industry.
I think of a 1951 movie, The Day the Earth Stood Still, where the Michael Rennie character, I forget what his name was. Klaatu. Was actually, he was sent here on a mission to save the world from itself. I don't think that's what's going on here, because it's now 72 years since the modern wave of UFOs took place back in 1947. So they're up there doing whatever they do, whatever that is, and they have not. And this is speculating with human thought that they haven't chose to make an appearance to announce themselves. So. I am puzzled. There have been various claims that disclosure is coming soon. I remember 1976 when Jimmy Carter was going to take the White House. There was a little report in the U.S. News and World Report. Washington Whispers was the feature, and it says Jimmy Carter is prepared to reveal unsettling disclosures about UFOs when he takes office. Well, it never happened. It never happened. So this particular time now with this Luis Elizondo, that video of that chase of a UFO. I personally, I don't know where he got permission to use that. That's not something that I know, but we have people coming forward that never would come forward before, because the subject is still taboo. It's a taboo subject in the modern mainstream area where, with the mainstream press, it's still taboo. Commercial television, NBC, ABC, CBS, it's taboo. But when the cable channels are, really into it. So, my own feeling is I don't think disclosure is anywhere around the corner, because they have too much to hide, and they don't want to admit to it. So I don't think it's coming anytime soon.
I think we all would agree that the hotbed of military activity, especially back in the World War II and thereafter, was New Mexico. And certainly there was a tremendous focus of UFO activity throughout New Mexico at that time, as though someone was very interested in our military potential at that time. So it gave us a human element, and that would be our exact approach if we were to initially discover an inhabited planet elsewhere, and that we would first check out their military potential. And then there was a progression to the phenomena. Then there were landings, and then there were occupant sightings. The buzzing the White House in '52 on those two separate nights. So in other words, there was a progression. But after all these years, the fact that there hasn't been this landing on the White House front lawn, so to speak. Dr. Hynek, we used to often talk about what we're dealing with time travelers. The idea that as time travelers, you do not alter the course of history. You do not interact. You just observe. And then after all these times, or because of the relevance of time and space, that we're dealing with a phenomenon that a year to us may be like a week to them. And as a result, we don't, and again, our human nature of always trying to think alien and trying to interpret as far as motives when we don't even, we can't even predict as far as our weather. And yet, we try to assume as far as what a higher intellect may be, as far as their perception of what, and it may be as John Keel or Charles Ford, as far as we're the universal insane asylum. So stay away from these people. We're the galactic zoo. They come by and they observe at times just to have a few laughs at our expense. And there are all types of theories about even the universal tricksters popping in. And Dr. Hynek often used to question, why don't we have just one good sighting a year, which would also smack of something more distant, traversing those tremendous distances of time and space and arriving here just occasionally. And so we have a problem because we're dealing with a phenomena that seems to be here on a regular basis. Is it a case of where they've set up shop, bottom of the oceans, the dark side of the moon, that type of thing? Or are they here, able to pop in and out interdimensionally at will? So we're putting the cart in front of the horse again when we're trying to speculate as to alien motive and agenda, because we're still trying to prove alien presence.
Well, two things. One, from the aliens' point of view, they may feel that they've gone bent over backwards to announce their presence to us. I mean, the sightings over the Capitol, that's Washington, D.C. in 1952. There was that. There's all of the military encounters. They've certainly made themselves a presence known to a lot of military people. The incident of the nuclear weapons base in Montana, where all the missiles were shut down after the UFO. I mean, they're certainly sending a message in that sense, even if they're not concerned about the man on the street. The other thing is, what do you do with the stories of the landing at Holloman Air Force Base in 1964? I mean, if you accept that that happened and Eisenhower was there, and there's been a lot written about that, about the cover story that he was with a dentist in Palm Springs, but he was spirited off to, was it Holloman? It was Holloman, not Edwards Air Force Base. And that there was a meeting at that time. Do you people think that that happened? Are you convinced that it happened? Because if that happened, then the contact has happened. They're already, they're already interacting, but they're interacting silently, because I think that's best for their interests and best for the interests of all concerned. Somebody thinks that in our government, for sure.
Well, my problem with any type of form of contact or interaction, or this even suggestion of this galactic exchange program that's been going on, since the 50s.
Like Serpo, that idea. Yeah.
That, and why are we still scrambling on these unknowns? Why are we still acting as though we're dealing with a phenomenon that we have no answers, no solutions to?
Because our left hand doesn't talk to our right hand.
And that certainly could be the problem, but then maybe it's about time, especially for the different branches of the military, that they get on the same page.
But what about Holloman? Don?
The Holloman landing, I have a particular interest in. I was stationed at Holloman Air Force Base just a few months after that landing is said to have happened. I got there a little too late, but people were still talking about it quietly, nervously, don't say I said anything, but I think, something landed here, that kind of deal.
For which I encouraged you that you need to look into this further, given that you were there and the buzz was still that something had just happened.
Even to me, more excitingly, recently it was April 27th, just a few weeks ago. I held a statewide MUFON meeting in Alamogordo and gave a slide presentation about the Holloman landing case. Of course, with Holloman right down the road, you might as well just do it in their face, right? So that's really what I was doing. And I had actually picked up a new Holloman witness back in 2014. This guy submitted a report to MUFON saying that he was at the base some years later and talked to a colonel who had been there before he was commissioned. And it's kind of a long story, but the guy, basically was told by the colonel that when the colonel was an air policeman, he had driven a high-ranking base commander out to the landing site and so forth. I exchanged 60 emails with this witness, just to give you an idea. Picked up a lot of information and put together a slideshow. And I did that slideshow, and I was just about getting through with it, and the guy in the audience raised his hand. And so I called on him, and he said, my father was Colonel Godman, who was base commander at Holloman at the time. And I figured, okay, now what's coming? Is this going to be he said it never happened, deal or something. He walks up and hands me a signed, notarized affidavit to the effect, well, let me just see if I can tell you a little bit of the narrative that was in that document. Basically what he said was, I was just a kid at the time myself, and we lived in the base commander's residence, And my dad had the red telephone by the bed. That's the one that rings usually only if it's the president, saying, we're under attack, I'm in the bunker, here are your orders, and it's that kind of a telephone that never rang the whole time that he was there as base commander, except one night. And it was the night of April 30th, 1964, and he got all excited and had to leave in a hurry and so forth. And when he got back, we found out that he had been driven out to a landing site and something anomalous had landed. There's actually a lot more to the document than that. It involves Ernst Steinhoff, for example, who was there, was supposedly involved in some way. He was one of the Operation Paperclip German scientists. This just kind of fell into my lap, the guy just sticks this document in my face, and says, here, my dad was there, he was base commander, he says it happened, I suppose my main feeling about that is if the Air Force from this point wants to say it didn't happen, they're going to have kind of a hard time.
When are you going to stick that in their face?
I already have. Well, I've done one newspaper column about it so far in my column, and I've written an article for the MUFON Journal about it, and I will no doubt be doing some further writing about it. But it just nothing better could have happened, than for that guy to come to the meeting. And I do have to give credit to my state section director, Maria Tellier, who did such a good job of publicizing the meeting, that this guy who was not a MUFON member or anything, knew about it and came, with that document and handed it to me.
Does anyone remember the date of the Lonnie Zamora sighting?
April 24th, 1964.
6 days before that.
6 days before.
Yeah, and
There's a book called Encounter in the Desert, all about the Lonnie Zamora sightings.
That isn't the one by Kevin Randall.
I think it is. I think you should take a look at that because it mentions the April 24th date a number of times.
How much did you charge me for that book this weekend? I think
$47. but that was the cut rate price.
Yeah.
The problem was I had to order from Amazon so that I'd have some down here, so I had to add that service charge to the cover price.
Well, let's talk about the fact that Lonnie Zamora saw this craft come down. He saw beings, and it was a few days before the Holloman Air Force landed. Somebody once speculated that was going to be the Holloman, that they got the date and the coordinates wrong.
Well, not necessarily the date, the coordinates wrong. They came down to the wrong place and had to reschedule the meeting.
Reschedule the meeting.
Okay?
Yes.
It's not as ridiculous as it sounds.
And we have a witness, basically at least one witness, who has said that, we know about the exchange between ground control and the bomber pilot doing the test flight, who said, I see an object up here, it's buzzing around me and I'm not alone. They told him to make a turn around and I'll come back and look and see if you can still see it. He says it's on the ground now. There's this kid downtown.
When was that? When?
That was April 30th, 1964.
That was the day of the...
It was a shortwave listener downtown, Alamogordo, who was listening. And of course, the next day he went to the press and everything. And the Air Force told him he was full of beans and so forth, but he knew what he had heard. And he actually heard the pilot say, well, ground control asked the pilot when the thing was on the ground, were there any markings? And the pilot's exact words were, quote, same as Socorro, unquote.
Wow. So we got our answer. They're not going to land on the White House lawn because they respect the lawn. They found a place to land where, they wouldn't do any damage to the lawn.
Not get hit by golf balls.
Right, so the potential of perhaps they have landed, perhaps they've had some sort of communication. But getting, something interesting that we heard at the Scientific Coalition for UFP Research event that happened, a physicist was there regarding, how their attitudes. And it's something very similar to what Hynek was talking about there. And he has this model of where, the closer you get to the speed of light, there's also time anomalies, time perspective changes. And what he has this model of is technology not beyond what we have now, where we can have a fleet of ships go out and look around, the galaxy, and as long as they rendezvous together at certain times that could be calculated, they would be on the same timeline. However, everyone else would be on a different timeline. So one of the things they could do, for instance, is go to a planet, drop off some experiment, maybe some critter, come back the next day, and to the person who dropped it off on the ship, it would have been just a day. But to the critter, it could have been thousands and thousands of years. In fact, once they left, they would no longer be able to interact with humans. But the same sort of thing, he posits his questions. What if that's the same, time is different? If they were going to come here, why would they talk to us or even tell us much if they did talk to us, if when they come back, none of the people they talked to the day before are even going to be there anymore? I think that it's just, it messes with your mind when you think about the science. But there could be many different reasons that they don't have much of an interest to communicate.
Or they have had an enormous interest to communicate. We need to talk about the Dogon tribe in Africa.
But the issue with, they have the ability to land wherever they want. They can land at the White House. They can communicate to anybody they want. They can communicate however they want. So, they wouldn't need to be fearful of that mode, like we're suggesting here, I would imagine.
And some of us in the audience might remember or have heard of Robert Emenegger, who did the book UFOs Past, Present, and Future, and he was contracted by the Air Force in the early, mid-70s, and his contact happened to be Colonel George Weinbrenner at Foreign Technology Division at Wright-Pat, who was also Dr. Heinech's last boss at Wright-Patterson. And in the course of receiving material and seeing information as far as for this proposed UFO documentary by the Air Force that never transpired, Emenegger claims that he saw the Holloman landing film. And he claims that there were two others that saw the exact same footage. So there's enough information here that we have to...
Don, can I go on from that? He claimed more than that he saw it. At first, the deal was they were going to use it for disclosure, and it was going to be part of this movie, UFOs Yesterday, Today, and Tomorrow. And that shortly before this thing was wrapped up, that the Air Force changed its mind and retracted footage. But Emenegger has said that there's, I think it's either 8 or 11 seconds in what was released in that documentary, hosted by Rod Serling, that is the Holloman landing. There were 8 seconds or 11 seconds already cut into the film that they didn't take out. So when you watch that in that documentary, according to the filmmaker, Emenegger, that's footage he got from the Air Force of the saucer coming down. You see it above the hill line, and you see it descending in front of the mountains, and you see it coming down. You don't quite see it touching ground.
It's just a fraction, a couple seconds of film. And you can see this on YouTube. You can watch the whole film on YouTube, but people have also spliced out this few seconds of, and it looks much different than the footage around it.
It almost looked like a car with tires on it in one of the shots.
Yeah, so it looks like old film with mountains.
Yeah. There's also, what do they call it in the desert when you get the heat coming up? And,
Yeah.
Well, but this wasn't a mirage, but you get a little distortion when you're looking at from the heat waves coming on. Yeah, there's a little bit of that.
I have a question for Don Burleson on this. You mentioned the paperclip German Ernst Steinhoff.
Right.
What was his role in this?
Now, the document I received doesn't specify. It just said that it talks about his son, who the writer of the document knew, and it talks about the fact that that an air policeman saw the landing and called it in, reported, which is how the base commander, found out about it. And the fact that the air policeman turned out to be a psychiatric patient out of California somewhere, and so disturbed by the whole experience that he was having a hard time with reality over it. And he said, somehow Dr. Steinhoff was involved, but it doesn't specify how. And the base commander later, when he was being taken around by his son, when he was dying of cancer, kind of taking the old man around saying, okay, here's some nice places on the base you remember, pleasant memories. They went by a certain spot, and the base commander said, that's where Dr. Steinhoff and I saw what we saw.
Right, the reason I asked was that we interviewed the sons of Ernst Steinhoff, and Steinhoff came over with Werner von Braun and the Paperclip Germans, and were
Pictured with them, yeah.
yes, he was actually sort of the second in the hierarchy, just under von Braun, and in interviewing his sons, which was only last year. They said that their father, they didn't want to, obviously, they didn't want to say so much, and they said, but their father, in addition to being a rocket engineer and stationed at Holloman, working on guided missiles and things like that, that his father was also one of the Air Force's chief investigators of unidentified flying objects. But I just passed that along because he didn't expand on it.
All right, so Don, you got to get your book on this out as soon as possible. It looks like you have enough material. Here's a question. We have a couple more that came in from the audience. Did any of you ever speak with Leo Spear from Roswell, claimed in his obituary to have guarded where alien remains had been put at building S-84 on the Roswell Army base? Kevin?
Yes, I spoke to him, and that's not what he told me.
Okay.
Leo Spear told me that he didn't see anything, he wasn't involved, because he was not part of the crew that had gone out there. But his friends were, and they told him what had gone on. So Leo Spear, when I talked to Leo Spear, he said that his friends came back agitated about this thing and told him the story. And he didn't believe them until the thing was announced in the newspaper the next day. So since it's his obituary, I'm wondering if the family didn't misinterpret something that he might have said, or figured that he was telling them a story from his point of view as opposed to something that he'd heard from his friends. But when I talked to Spear, he didn't have he was not directly involved.
Was he specific about what his friends said?
Well, he was talking about the flying saucer crash and that sort of thing, and he just didn't believe.
Did they mention the bodies?
I'd have to go back. No, I don't think they did. I'd have to go back and look at the transcript of the interview with him. But he was not a first-hand witness. He was a second-hand witness to it. But it was important because of the timing. He said, my friends came back and were talking about having been involved in cordoning off the area, that sort of thing.
And we had interviewed him as well, and I concur, and it was in the old bit, but it mentioned that he was involved, and we spoke to 4 of the family members mentioned, and it was our conclusion that either it was because of what they had heard as he was repeating what he had heard from others, but that they could never, specifically state that it was directly, as far as from their father.
Okay, great.
I'd gone through and I was calling all the MPs from the base, is how I came up with him. And the ones I could find.
Okay. We'll start with Kevin. This is going to be controversial because I know there's going to be a wide gap of opinions here, and we're going to start with Kevin because I think he'll have a lot of eye rolling going on for other answers to this question. So we can all roll our eyes as he answers his question.
Or wave.
Here's a question. Do you think aliens have walked among us and are giving advice to the government?
Wow.
Mr. Randall.
That would explain a lot. No, I don't think so. And that's the short and sweet of it, which doesn't mean I'm right and everybody else is wrong. It just means in this case I have not come across anything that would be suggestive of that. Which means, in essence, I haven't come across anything that's suggestive of that. Nothing more profound than that.
I would say I seriously doubt it, simply because there's no, so far as I know, there's no evidence.
Mm-hmm. So, which kind of begs the question, what happened at Holloman? Was there a discussion, do you believe, then? And what do you think that amounted to?
Well, that goes a little beyond, what we actually know. My witness that I found back in 2014, said that his colonel friend who kind of blurted out some stuff and then seemed to regret, having talked about it, said that he saw things being loaded onto the craft, things being taken off, and so forth. And what all of that was about, heaven only knows, it's sort of reminiscent of that final scene in Close Encounters, you know. But I think anything beyond that, anything beyond what witnesses have told us is really just, you know, speculative.
Okay, gotcha. Just because Emenager had shared information about that, but did anybody else did you want to comment on that, Tom?
Yeah, I think if they walked among us, remember the preacher walks among us, we would have seen them because they were the ones that we have been described to us were 3.5 feet tall with very large heads, no mouth, very frail. I think they would have been sort of self-evident.
Noticed.
But if
We're
they...
from Corona.
And they have a bent finger.
Yes, but certainly those would have been obvious, but I guess they're talking about aliens that look human-like, and how would we know? I don't know.
So I think that was a joke from Kevin again, and I think you're going to have to explain this one to us again.
Who's seen The Invaders? David Vincent, and the way they could tell it was an alien creature, their little finger was stiff. But then they fixed it later on. That went away.
There was on one occasion where both Paul and actor Roy Thinnis had picked me up from LAX, and we were in Roy's Jaguar at the time, and we were driving up through Beverly Hills, and a car passed by, and the driver extended out his arm and did that. And so I asked Roy, "Do you see that often?" He says, "Yes," and they recognize me, and that's my salute.
I thought his salute involved a different finger.
That's yours. Paul, did you want to?
Well, as far as do they walk among us, we have some stories that we can talk about. The story of Val Valerian, the stranger at the Pentagon.
That's
Looks
what
like
I was-
about him, and the claims that he was a very human-like, very handsome, and that he spent a couple of years as a guest at the Pentagon exchanging information. We heard that story. One thing I can tell you personally, since we've read a lot about the claims of alien hybrids, part of the abduction program is about creating a race that is a cross between us and them. We hear a lot of those stories. I want to tell you about a story that happened. I don't know how to evaluate it, but after the movie Roswell came out, a lot of people came and contacted me about different things. And there was someone who worked in the film business, not a high position, but he said, could he meet with me? Because he had things he wanted to tell me in absolute confidence. He never wanted it to get back to him in terms of, I don't even remember his name. You're not going to get a name. But we had lunch, and what he told me, he was a short guy, pretty frail. And he said that he was the 5th child in the family. He believes that he's a hybrid. He said that his body type, everything about him is so completely different than everybody else in the family. They've always kind of treated him like something different, you know, like the freak of the family or something. He said, there are things about me that are different. And he showed me his elbow, and he said, you know, my elbow is completely square like this. I've never seen anybody else with an elbow like this. And he said, I want to show you what I can do with my eyes. And he said that he had complete voluntary control over his pupils. And as I sat there across from him, he made his pupils go very, very, very tiny voluntarily, and then very, very, very large. Never seen anybody else do that. He said, you know, he's frightened to talk to anybody about this, doesn't want to lose his job, but he wanted to get it off his chest and tell me because he thought I would understand. I think that's pretty interesting.
Show me the DNA.
Exactly. 23 and me, you know.
I think this was before there was a 23andMe.
Well, but there was DNA testing when you looked.
What do you think about the story, though, about Eisenhower's meeting in 1954 with the supposed extraterrestrials?
I'm prepared to believe it at this point. I mean, she asked, what do I think about the Eisenhower meeting with the extraterrestrials in Air Force Base in 1964? At this point, I'm prepared to believe it. I mean, the timing of the Eisenhower cover story, that he suddenly had to go see a dentist and then is incommunicado for the spirit of time. You know, that they say, spirited away to the base. And I've heard a lot of things along the lines of what Don Burleson has told us that substantiate it. Now, Laura Eisenhower is, I guess, a granddaughter, and she says a lot of things that are pretty out there, right? She doesn't.
Very
Not the most persuasive person. She certainly claims that her grandfather met with the aliens there. I don't know whether that doesn't prove the case.
She meets with the aliens.
I missed that part. But I guess if it did happen, then it changes history completely. I mean, Roswell, 1947, the recovery. And then 1964, contact, and they've been in cahoots with each other ever since. I do believe that they've been in cahoots with each other. And I think maybe the irony is that when Jimmy Kimmel spoke to Barack Obama and was asking him these questions, he said, Barack, are there aliens? What can you tell us about? Are we being visited? And Barack Obama, with a straight face, said, I can't tell you, Jimmy. Why can't you tell me? He said, the aliens won't let me. Barack Obama said that. You can find it on YouTube. And of course it was either the audience laughing or it was canned laughter.
It was one of very many jokes that he told during that interview.
Yeah.
In fact, he was aboard a plane here in Roswell on one occasion. The first thing he said was, Klaatu Barada Necto.
And that joke went over as well as many of Kevin's jokes. It was not appreciated.
It's really interesting that Ronald Reagan, during one of the elections, came to Roswell.
On 2 occasions.
It was right close to the election, and I don't think people knew for sure Reagan was going to beat Mondale at that point. Was it Mondale? Was it against Mondale?
The second time goes up Monday.
Anyway, people said, what are you doing wasting your time going to New Mexico now, a state that has 3 electoral? And he came to Roswell and spoke from Hangar 84, where they say the aliens were.
Right outside there.
And then Barack Obama came to Roswell once on a weird occasion and gave a speech, and he said, we want the world to know that the United States is a country that keeps its secrets. And he said that from here in Roswell.
Are you guys alleging alien collusion?
Either
Paul
alien
is alleging.
No, I'm alleging alien dictatorship.
No, but I
That's
mean,
even worse.
from the body language and from the answers, of course, most of the panel is very skeptical about this, but it's great to have Paul Davids here to share some of this
Yeah,
information.
because I'm not skeptical about anything.
And there would have the answer.
Time travel. I do not believe in time travel.
And the answers to many of these questions would have been much more boring if it wasn't for you, Paul. So I do appreciate that we have someone.
And all of the time travel, I knew you were going to say that because I saw the images
You saw it prior.
No, Macho Kaku wrote